Hello and welcome to the Warcraft Academy Guide to the Sha-of-Pride Normal. This is the fourth encounter in the instance and is fairly complex. If you only want a summary of the fight, use the menu at the top to skip to the end, otherwise keep watching. First of all, the fight focuses on a pride mechanic. You start the fight with a power bar that displays your pride. Certain abilities give you pride, and the level of pride that you have triggers additional abilities that you have to deal with. Think of it like corruption on Cho'Gall. The first ability that you're going to have to deal with is Gift of the Titans. Now this puts a debuff on 3 players, or 8 players if you're 25 man, and whilst you have this debuff you cannot gain any pride. And if everyone who has the debuff stacks within 8 yards of each other, they gain a damage and healing and haste buff for 15 seconds. So every time this is used, you need to make sure everyone who has it stacks up until they have the damage buff. The other less fun debuff is Mark of Arrogance, which is going to be used usually just before or just after you gain Gift of the Titans, and this is going to put a debuff on 2 or 5 random players, and it does damage to them each second until it is dispelled, and when it does get dispelled, the dispeller will gain 5 pride. The damage from Mark of Arrogance is pretty high, so you do need to dispel it pretty quickly, but what you can do is use the healers that have Gift of the Titans to dispel it. Since they're immune to pride, they can dispel it without gaining any pride themselves. It's pretty important that you do this quickly. You're always going to have at least one healer with Gift of the Titans, so there's always going to be someone that can dispel without gaining any pride, usually 2. The boss has an energy bar that slowly fills from 1 to 100 and it takes 1 minute to completely fill. At 35 energy he's going to use Self-Reflection, which creates a black pool underneath each player, and after 2 seconds the pool explodes and a small ad spawns. If you're standing on the pool when it explodes, you take damage, so you need to move away from the pools when they appear. Once the ads spawn, your tank needs to pick them up and you can AoE them to kill them. At 65 energy he'll use Imprison, which traps 2 or 4 players within a prison at one of the 4 corners around the boss. You can see here where the prisons are. He'll use 2 opposite prisons on 10 man and all 4 on 25 man. Whilst trapped in the prison, the player takes damage every second and gains pride. In order to free them, players need to simultaneously stand on the yellow glowing floor panels around that prison. You need 1 player for each floor panel to turn it blue, and they need to stay standing on it until all the tiles around that prison are also blue. On 10 man you need 2 people per prison, and on 25 man you need 3 people per prison. In order to free players promptly, you'll want to have pre-assigned locations for your raiders to run to in order to activate the floor panels quickly. Healers and tanks are best to handle these because they can't be trapped themselves, so you won't need to adjust on the fly. On 10 man we had the 2 tanks handle the far right prison and 2 healers handle the close left prison. On 25 man we'd have the tanks and 1 healer handle the far right, 3 healers on the far left, and then our remaining healers and anyone else split between the closest 2 prisons. You can use Warlock gateways to quickly get to the prison when he casts it. A few seconds after he imprisons players, he's also going to spawn a large manifestation of pride, 1 at the back of the room if you're on 10 man, and on 25 you'll also get 2 more at the sides. These ads are going to continuously cast Mocking Blast, and this does damage and gives pride, but it can be interrupted. You need to kill these ads as quickly as possible, so have someone assigned to silence or interrupt them immediately and burn them down. You really need to have the ads move closer to the centre of the room, so assign someone to silence each one so that it moves closer to the middle as soon as they spawn. You can also use Death Grip to position them nearby instantly, which makes everything a lot easier, and you can also stun and interrupt them to prevent them from casting. Focus these ads down as fast as possible. Finally, when the boss reaches 100 energy, he'll use an AoE damaging attack called Swelling Pride. This does really high damage to your raid and grants 5 pride to everyone hit, but it also does additional effects depending on how much pride you had when you got hit. If you have 25 or more pride, you'll spawn a swirly black effect underneath you that explodes after 3 seconds and does 300,000 damage to anyone standing in it, which will probably one-shot you because you'll be low from the explosion. If you have 50 or more pride, you'll create a projection somewhere within 15 yards, which is displayed as a void zone. Everyone in the raid can see this void zone, but the person who created it will also see a green arrow above it. After 6 seconds, the void zone will explode and AoE the whole raid. However, if the person that created it stands in it, it won't explode. So if you see a green arrow, run towards it. If you have 75 or more pride, you'll be affected by Aura of Pride for 25 seconds. This causes you to deal constant, very high shadow damage to anyone within 5 yards of you, and this happens every second. So if you have more than 75 pride, you need to make sure that you're far away from anyone else before Swelling Pride is cast. Finally, if you have 100 pride, you'll become permanently mind controlled. However, when you first reach 100 pride, you'll gain a 50% damage and healing buff, and you'll only be mind controlled when you get hit by Swelling Pride after already being at 100 pride. Outside of these abilities, he does also have a simple tank swap mechanic which causes tanks to gain extra pride if they don't taunt off each other. This doesn't really warrant any explanation other than taunt the boss when you don't have stacks. 2 tanks is more than enough for this. There are 2 main ways that you can handle the fight. You can either be loosely spread or tightly stacked. If you choose to be always tightly stacked, you'll get maximum uptime on the damage buff because you'll always be close enough to trigger it when you get Gift of the Titans. You'll find healing easier, and you'll be able to use close range raid cooldowns such as Barrier and Smoke Bomb during his Swelling Pride cast. Have your raid stack up at the back of the room in this position here, with your tanks in front slightly to the side. When the boss reaches 35 energy and starts to cast Self-Reflection, you need to temporarily spread just a few yards to avoid the small explosions, and then you can stack again to AoE. Once he reaches 65 energy and uses Imprison, you can use Warlock gateways to quickly move to the furthest prisons. Try to move as soon as he gets above 60 energy so you can be in position in time, but don't stand on the actual prisons until it's cast or you'll be knocked away. As soon as you've freed the prisons, most of your raid should immediately collapse back to the stack point. The only people that should not be stacked are your tanks and whoever is silencing the big adds. You need at least one person assigned to each add to either silence or death grip it so that it moves closer to your raid, so that everyone can DPS it from your stack point. Once they're within attack range, continue to use silences or stuns to prevent them from casting whilst you kill them. When the boss is at almost 100 energy, which will probably be whilst the adds are still alive, use a strong raid cooldown and prepare for Swelling Pride. Immediately after it hits, spread out to avoid any swirlies underneath the raid, and keep an eye out for any green arrows to soak if you're above 50 pride. This rotation repeats for basically the entire fight. Now, being tightly stacked is by far the most efficient in terms of damage and healing, but it does mean that your raiders need to be very good at stacking and spreading for the small adds, and after the Swelling Pride, otherwise they're just going to get one shot by all the swirlies on the ground. Having a raid leader call when to stack and spread will help a lot with this. If you aren't very good at this, you can just have your raid loosely stacked around purple. This doesn't change much, but it does mean you're not going to be insta-killed if you fail to move, although you will need to stack when you get the Gift of the Titans debuff instead. Once the boss reaches 30% health, all pride resets to 0 and his energy resets to 0. At this point he'll start doing pulsing AoE damage every 10 seconds for the remainder of the fight, and this damage increases your pride. This is where you need to pop Bloodlust and really burn him down, but remember you still need to deal with all the fight mechanics as you normally would. To summarise, stack up tightly, dodge the pulls during self-reflection, AoE the adds, stack up. Free players from the prisons by standing on the floor panels, stack up again. Silence and stun the big adds and kill them quickly. Use a raid cooldown when the boss reaches full energy and dodge the swirlies on the ground that come after. Run into green arrows when you see them and burn the boss down when he gets to 30%.